So a U.S. citizen, no, that's the key right there. A U.S. citizen was held by ICE for 3.5 years. And he was imprisoned as a deportable alien. But he is, and was at that time a U.S. citizen. But they held him in jail for 3.5 years as a deportable alien. Davina Watson, he was 23 years old when ICE took him in, at which time he said, "I am a U.S. citizen." To the officers, he said to the judge, "I am a U.S. citizen." He said to the people in jail, the officers at jail, "I am a U.S. citizen." It didn't matter. They didn't listen to him. Davina Watson told everyone, "I am a U.S. citizen," but they still held him in jail 3.5 years. Now, he had no money, so he could not afford a lawyer. And here's another key point in this is that there is no right to a court-appointed attorney in immigration court. There is no right to an attorney in immigration court, a court-appointed attorney in immigration court. So if you don't have the money for a lawyer, you are in big trouble, like Davina was. He did not have money for a lawyer, 23 years old. So he wrote a letter by hand to the judge. "I am a U.S. citizen." And he attached, "My father is a U.S. citizen. Here's my father's phone number. Here's my mother's phone number." And he attached to that note a copy of his father's record of naturalization. Am I saying that right? He had the evidence right there for the judge that his father was a U.S. citizen. Judge completely ignored it. So on top of it, when he was finally released 3.5 years after being in jail, because they realized all of a sudden we made a mistake when we quickly looked into who your father was, we looked into the wrong person. "Oh, sorry. Oh, I see now your dad is an American citizen, which makes you an American citizen. So sorry about that." He lived at that time in New York. He was in, was it Alabama at the time? Okay. I think it was Alabama. When they released him from prison, they released him in Alabama with no money, not a cent in his pocket. And he's from New York. And not a word about anything. So Watson had told all the officers, everyone, as I said, he was a citizen. He gave them his father and stepmother's phone numbers. ICE officers did not call those phone numbers. They did attempt to look up his father. His father's name is Hopeton Orlando Watson, but they confused him with Hopeton Livingston Watson. Hopeton Livingston Watson, the wrong Hopeton Watson, not his father, was not a citizen of the United States. He also lived in Connecticut instead of New York. And Davina lived in New York. He didn't have a son. He did not even have a son. And he arrived in the United States at a different time than Davina's father. But the officers apparently didn't notice any of those mistakes. And based on the wrong file, they concluded that Watson was not a citizen and marked him for deportation, and yet still held him in jail for 3.5 years. So Watson was correct all along. He was a U.S. citizen. After he was released, he filed a complaint. Last year, the district judge of New York awarded him $82,500 in damages, citing regrettable failure of the government. So you think that's, at least he gets some compensation? No, they took that away. They took that away from him. Later, an appeals court ruled that Watson is not eligible for any of that money. They said his case was disturbing, But the statute of limitations actually expired while he was still in ICE custody without a lawyer. So because they said the statute of limitations expired while he was still in custody, he could no longer even get the $82,500 that the judge awarded him for the regrettable mistake. So he gets nothing. Immigration and Customs Enforcement kept Davino Watson imprisoned as a deportable alien. The Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals acknowledged that the ruling was harsh, but said it was bound by precedent. They said there is no doubt that the government botched the investigation into Watson's assertion of citizenship, and that as a result, a U.S. citizen was held for years in an immigration detention and was nearly deported. The court ruled, this is what the court said, nonetheless, we must conclude that Watson is not eligible to damages from the government. You took away 3.5 years of his life. 3.5 years in prison. And they come up with some kind of loophole to make sure that he doesn't get anything. The Court of Appeals didn't even dispute any of the facts that ICE had made all these mistakes. The problem, the judge ruled, is one of timing. I can't. The 2-year statute of limitations on his false imprisonment started ticking when Watson first went before a judge, the majority said. That meant it expired while he was still in ICE custody without a lawyer. The district court judge had ruled that this case merited an exception, as Courthouse News reports, but he got nothing. He ended up with nothing, and that's where the story ends. He has nothing for 3.5 years of being in prison, wrongfully. So some stats by NPR shows that Watson is not the only case like this by any means. From 2007 through July of last year, 963 U.S. citizens were held in local jails at the request of immigration officers. Now, I said U.S. citizens. 693 U.S. citizens were held in local jails at the request of immigration officials, U.S. citizens. 818 more Americans were held in immigration detention centers during the same time frame. Again, American citizens being held in immigration detention centers. I want to just run back real quick to what I had said earlier. There's no right to a court-appointed attorney in immigration court. And that's the problem because, because they said the whole legal disaster could have been avoided if Watson had an attorney at the outset, wrote one of the judges who was ordering his damages. With a lawyer, plaintiff promptly would have been declared a citizen and released almost immediately after he was arrested, if he was arrested at all. So literally the fact that this man did not have a lawyer, could not afford a lawyer, and because there is no right of court-appointed attorney in immigration court, he was held for 3.5 years. So I want to get back to that in a second because Trump just did something that's going to make it even worse for people, of course. But I do have some more stats I just found. ICE reported last week that they have arrested 41,000 people in 100 days, a 38% increase over the number of arrests this time last year. More people are being held in detention centers than ever. Northwestern University professor Jacqueline Stevens estimated in 2011, and now let's be real. Let's keep it real. This has not just come because of Trump. This started long before Trump. Northwestern University professor Jacqueline Stevens estimated in 2011 that ICE detained at least 4,000 U.S. citizens in 2010. Several were actually deported. So they deported U.S. citizens. They're deporting U.S. citizens now. In 2011, Berkeley study found that approximately 3,600 U.S. citizens have been arrested by ICE between 2009 and 2011. Again, we're talking about citizens, and approximately 400,000 people are detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement every year. Some of them are U.S. citizens. So the bright side of that is that he has taken his situation, Davino Watson, where he was imprisoned for 3.5 years, where he was granted $87,500 by court, and then had even that taken away from him. He lost 3.5 years of his life. The conditions in prison were not good that he had to endure, and he comes out at the end as an advocate. He comes out at the end now in his 30s, and this happened when he was in his 20s. He comes out at the end fighting for other people's rights and trying to make the best out of the situation and make sure that it doesn't happen to other people. So good for him. Good for him. I'm glad that he's finding strength in a tragedy, and it really does have to do with who's in control.